Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really pivotal figure in modern Chinese history, Yuan Shikai,
Hmm.
and specifically his complex role in how Chinese national identity developed.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating and often controversial period.
And for you, our listener, likely an IB history student working through essay questions like, discuss the impact of Yuan Shikai's actions on the rise of national identity in China. Well, our mission today is to unpack this.
Yeah, provide some clarity, maybe some different angles to think about.
Exactly. So we've got our sources, timelines, analyses. Let's dive in. We'll look at his actions, the good, the bad.
The intended and unintended consequences, chronologically and thematically. We'll consider different perspectives on his legacy, too.
Okay, so let's set the scene. 1912, the Qing dynasty is gone, the Republic is born,
A huge moment.
and then Sun Yat-sen, a key revolutionary leader, actually hands the presidency over to Yuan Shikai.
Which seems odd at first glance, maybe. But it was seen by some as, well, necessary, pragmatic.
Right, a way to avoid more fighting, keep
Yeah.
things stable.
Exactly. Sun Yat-sen's party, the Kuomintang, knew Yuan had the military muscle, especially the northern armies.
So offering him the presidency was sort of a strategic move.
A compromise, yeah, to try and secure the new republic. They even set up this parliamentary party structure, appearing to accept the Republican framework.
But the sources suggest Sun's allies were pretty wary from the start. They suspected Yuan had bigger ambitions.
They weren't wrong, as it turned out, and his early actions started ringing alarm bells.
Like moving the government to Beijing.
Precisely. Straight into his northern power base.
Yeah.
Consolidating control, you could say.
And then 1913, this huge international loan.
Ah, yes, the loan. That's a really interesting point, because it shows the dilemma.
How so?
Well, the republic was broke, basically.
Yeah.
It needed cash, desperately.
So the loan helped.
It provided money, yes. But the strings attached, they were tough. Foreign powers got significant control over China's finances.
Oof. So accusations started flying that he was selling out the country.
Pretty much. Prioritizing foreign cash over Chinese sovereignty. That was the charge, anyway.
And that definitely didn't help ease the Kuomintang's suspicions.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Especially after Song Jiaran, a top Kuomintang figure, was assassinated.
Many pointed the finger at Yuan, right?
Widely suspected, yes. And that assassination was really the spark for the Second Revolution in 1913.
So the Kuomintang tried to revolt against Yuan.
They did. They saw him becoming too powerful, too authoritarian. But the revolt failed.
And that failure was significant.
Hugely significant. Yuan seized the opportunity, kicked Kuomintang members out of provincial governments, and crucially,
What did it do?
he dissolved the National Assembly. Basically tore down those early democratic structures.
Wow, so much for the Republic. That's a major setback for any kind of national unity based on, democracy.
Definitely. It shifted power decisively towards him, away from representative government.
Okay, let's move forward a bit. World War I breaks out in 1914. How does that affect China?
Well, the European powers are distracted, right? And Japan sees an opportunity.
To expand its influence in China.
Exactly. Which leads directly to the infamous 21 demands in 1915.
Right, I've read about those. They were pretty extreme, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Our sources are clear. Accepting them fully would have essentially made China a Japanese protectorate.
Giving Japan control over politics, the economy, even territory.
Extensive control. It would have completely undermined China's independence. The very idea of China governing itself was at stake.
So, how did Yuan respond? This must have been a huge test.
It was. And his response,
Yeah.
well, let's just say it's highly controversial.
He accepted them.
He accepted a modified version, yes, after some negotiation, but still.
Still seen as giving in to Japan.
Widely seen that way, yes. A profound national humiliation, a betrayal, many felt.
Okay, but here's a twist maybe. You mentioned unintended consequences. Could this humiliation actually have strengthened national identity?
That's a really crucial point, especially for your analysis. It absolutely could, and many argue it did, by creating a common enemy. This shared sense of outrage against Japanese imperialism and against Yuan for giving in arguably forged a stronger sense of, a shared Chineseness in opposition.
So a negative event inadvertently fueling national feeling.
Precisely. National identity often forms in response to threats, to shared grievances. The 21 demands became a massive rallying point for anti-imperialist sentiment.
Okay, so public anger is rising over the 21 demands. And then what does Yuan do?
Then, in January 1916, despite all this, He declares himself emperor.
Wait, what? Emperor after they just got rid of the monarchy?
I know. The timing seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it? Formally abandoning the republic he was supposed to lead.
That just seems politically suicidal.
And it was. It completely backfired. Widespread opposition erupted immediately.
From who? The revolutionaries?
From them, yes, but also intellectuals, provincial leaders, even parts of his own military. It turns out Republican ideas, even though they were new and maybe fragile, had taken root more than he realized.
People didn't want to go back to an emperor.
Not in the way he envisioned, no. His imperial dream was just out of step, fundamentally rejected.
And it collapsed quickly.
Incredibly quickly. By March 1916, just a couple of months later, he was forced to renounce the throne.
Wow.
And then he died shortly after, in June 1916.
So the failure of his imperial project actually kind of proved the strength of Republican feeling, or at least the rejection of autocracy.
You could definitely argue that. It showed that turning back the clock wasn't going to work. It suggested a real shift in national consciousness, even amidst all the chaos.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. Assessing Yuan's impact on national identity.
It's complicated, isn't it? There are different ways to look at it.
On the one hand, maybe initially he provided some order after the Qing collapse. Some sources mention administrative reform.
Yes, that's one perspective. In that initial power vacuum, maybe a strong man like Yuan was needed just to hold things together, to create a semblance of a modern state structure.
But the sources we've looked at really lean into the negatives, don't they?
They do heavily emphasize the damage he caused. Suppressing democracy, the humiliation over the 21 demands, trying to become emperor.
All seen as undermining China's sovereignty and stopping a unified republican identity from forming.
Exactly. Setbacks for the nation, according to that view.
And then there's the aftermath. What happened right after he died?
Chaos, basically. The sources are very clear. His death ushered in the warlord era.
So the country just fragmented.
Completely. The regional armies he'd built up just started fighting each other for power. Years of internal conflict, instability.
And continued foreign interference and humiliation.
A really dark period in many ways, but paradoxically.
Another paradox.
Yeah. This era of fragmentation and weakness arguably intensified nationalism even further in the long run.
Because people wanted a strong, unified China even more.
Exactly. It fueled movements like the May 4th movement in 1919, which was a massive outpouring of nationalist and anti-imperialist feeling. So Yuan's legacy, even in failure and the chaos that followed, continued to shape that national consciousness.
So if you're tackling that essay question, discuss the impact of Yuan Shikai's actions on the rise of national identity in China. It's not a simple answer.
Not at all. You have to weigh the initial stability against the later damage. He offered a kind of order, but his pursuit of personal power wrecked the early republic.
But his negative actions, like giving in to Japan or trying to be emperor.
They might have inadvertently done more to unite people against something, creating a common enemy, both foreign and domestic. That sense of shared grievance can be a powerful unifier.
So, summarizing for our listener, Yuan Shikai, a real mixed bag for national identity. Initial stability, maybe some modernization attempts.
But ultimately, his authoritarianism, his imperial dream, derailed the republic.
Yet, counterintuitively, those very failures and humiliations might have galvanized a stronger sense of Chineseness through opposition.
Right. You need that nuanced perspective. Consider the immediate impact, but also the longer-term consequences, like the warlord era and the subsequent rise of nationalism it provoked. It's all connected.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to ponder, especially as you refine your arguments for those IB assessments. How might Chinese national identity have evolved differently if Yuan Shikai hadn't abandoned the republic? What if he'd actually supported those early democratic institutions instead of trying to become emperor?
Ooh, that's a great counterfactual. What path might China have taken then?
Exactly. Would it have led to a stronger, more unified nation sooner? Or perhaps different divisions would have emerged? It really highlights how much his choices mattered.
Definitely something to think about as you continue your analysis. The what-ifs of history can be revealing.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Yuan Shikai.